Thank you for joining me on the second half of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Before I jump into the third segment, I want to remind you guys one last time on today's show, if you have any questions or comments for me during this live show, use the tip and donations link, which is GSMCPodcast.net, there on your screen or running across the ticker down below. With any of your questions, doing this enables me to see your question pop up right away to my right in the chat box. We're able to have a conversation. I'm able to answer your questions on air, and it's more fun for me, in my opinion. It's a big help for the show, as well as the network and all the other shows running on it. Again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. Big thank you to you guys anytime you guys are able to use that with your questions or comments. But going back to that third segment, talking about playoff teams. We're a long way away from the playoffs. I do know that. But I think with so much change that's been going on in the NFL, a lot of trades. Just today there was a big one, and the free agent acquirements from other teams. The way that the draft is shaping up right now with all the rumors and everything shifting, it seems, every day. Thinking about who's going to make the playoffs came very hard to me when I decided to make these predictions. I saw other things where other people gave their inputs. Some people went 6 new teams that were going to make it. I stuck with 4 because, in all honesty, I don't think we're going to see much change because, funny enough, the good teams just got better, and the good teams from last year even got even better or got significantly worse. And that's where I kind of base my thought off of all of this and just seeing how it all shaped up. I only could go 4. I couldn't go more than 4. So just to recap, last season, the teams that made the playoffs from each conference in the AFC, the Ravens were the 1 seed, the Bills were the 2, Kansas City at 3, the Texans were the 4, Cleveland was the 5 seed, the Dolphins were the 6 seed, and number 7 was the Pittsburgh Steelers. In the NFC, San Francisco was 1, Dallas was the number 2, Detroit was at 3, Tampa Bay was the number 4 seed, the Philadelphia Eagles were 5, then the Rams were 6, and the Green Bay Packers were 7. It came down to a tight race last season. I expect it to be the same this coming season, barring any huge catastrophic injury and everybody's healthy. I think it's extremely hard to decide who's going to be in the playoffs, and for me, there was 4 new ones. With 4 new ones coming in, 4 had to go out. And I think right now, in my estimation, the teams to drop out of the playoffs are going to have to be the Bills, the Cleveland Browns, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Los Angeles Rams. I was very close to going with the Dolphins and Dallas dropping out of the playoffs. It might be crazy to think that because I know Dallas is still very good. The Dolphins are still very good. I couldn't get myself to drop the Dolphins just because after the trade news today, especially, I guess it's helped me today with Stephon Diggs moving on. The Dolphins are still probably the best team in that division. You could argue the Jets. I couldn't get myself to push them out of the playoffs. And with Dallas, I was really close. I haven't been a fan with what the Cowboys have been doing. That's been obvious. But, again, they still have Dak there. CeeDee's amazing. Michael Parsons is one of the best at his position. Trayvon Diggs is coming back. They have some of the best players at their position. So I have to see it for me to even believe it and predict that they're not going to make the playoffs. Because if they don't make the playoffs, oh my gosh, it's going to be like the end of the world for some people, and it's going to be like Christmas every day for another group of people. But those are the teams that I think are going to drop out of the playoffs. Again, it's extremely hard to determine who's going to make it and who's not. But the teams that are going to make the playoffs, that didn't make the playoffs last year, that I've been impressed with so far in free agency, we're going to start in the NFC. One team that's going to definitely make it, in my estimation, are the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings finished last year 7-10, and they had, a lot of people wouldn't notice because they lost Justin Jefferson. It wasn't great seeing them. Once they lost Kirk Cousins, you look at them and you're not really knowing who you're watching out there. But last season, regardless of all those injuries and a roster that wasn't very convincing anyway, they had 5 games where they lost by no more than 5 points, 3 games where they lost only by 1 touchdown, and 2 games where they lost by 10 or more points. They were 7-10 last year, and if 8 of those games, regardless of the two that they lost by 10 plus, they deserve to lose those. But you have 8 games there. In the loss column where you lost 10, if 8 of them go your way, the ball bounces the right way, they win 5 more games, they're definitely in the playoffs, arguably over the Rams or potentially the Green Bay Packers, just with the better record in those games. So you have that already with a depleted roster last year. That gives me some hope that they're just going to get better, because they have gotten better. They've improved on defense with Jonathan Grenard, Alex Van Ginkel, Blake Cashman, and Jerry Tillery all coming over to fortify their defensive front, their front 7, I guess, including the linebackers. You only really need a stud, average, or a little bit better in the secondary. That's something they're going to have to address in the draft if they don't trade away all their first-round, second-round picks trying to move up for a quarterback. But that's another thing you need. Obviously, the quarterback, Sam Darnold's on the roster right now. You're not going to get too far with Sam Darnold, but, I say that. Most people believe that. But last year, they were extremely close with Josh Dobbs, and just a rotation of quarterbacks when Josh Dobbs got hurt. I'm pretty sure I remember for a game or two. So all of that, how could you not be at least optimistic about what the Dolphins have been doing? I love Brian Flores as their defensive coordinator. I think they're trending in the right direction. I truly believe that. Keeping Justin Jefferson is obviously huge. They're going to have to do that. They brought in Aaron Jones. They already have TJ Hawkinson, who's an absolute stud. Their offensive line is still solid. They have all the pieces. They just need the quarterback. I expect them to address that. And then, in a division where the Lions still have to figure out Amon-Ra St. Brown. They played them very well last year. You have the Packers as well, who are very young, impressive, but you can get a game or two there. Then you have the Chicago Bears, who also have gotten extremely better over the course of this free agency, but they're going to be young. There's not too much experience there. You're going to tell me you can't win one or sweep both of those games if you're the Minnesota Vikings? I'm very high on the Vikings. They had a very iffy record up and down season last year. Very unlucky. I think it goes more their way this year. I have them in the playoffs. I don't know what seed. I don't think they'll win the division. They're most likely going to be a wild card game, but I have them in there as my first team. The Atlanta Falcons are my next team. Similarly, I'm on the Atlanta Falcons bandwagon. I've stressed that their defense is the glaring need. I acknowledge that. I know that's where all the fingers will be pointed. But again, they finished 7-10 last year. With the addition now of Kirk Cousins, you're going to tell me that Kirk Cousins makes those mistakes that a Desmond Ridder or a Taylor Heineke made last year? I find that hard to believe. Even if Kirk is 70%, 60% at worst, not to throw too much shade on Heineke or Desmond Ridder, but I think you would take a 60-70% Kirk Cousins over what you got out of Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke last season. In reality, speaking truthfully, that's one thing. You had Bijan Robinson and Drake London last year, not really used to the best of their ability, and they both basically almost got over 1,000 yards rushing for Bijan and 1,000 yards receiving for Drake London. They were just under it, I'm sure, by no more than 80 yards for Drake London or no more than 50 or 60 yards for Bijan. So they're putting up those numbers already sort of handicapped with their offense and the kind of scheme and limit of talent that they were able to get out of from the quarterback position. And they had a great run game, but it just seemed you turn it on, you're looking at the games, the Falcons are in a close game. You tune in, and it's always like a mistake by Desmond Ridder, a bad read, a bad throw. He throws an interception, he gets sacked, and it kills the whole drive. And they end up losing those games, and you're not going to get that with a Kirk Cousins. Even if you have questions around his mobility, his health, I think that's still an improvement. I know they're going to address the defense in the draft and even more so in free agency. I'm liking what the Falcons are doing. With a 7-10 record last year, I think that can only improve. In a weak division that it stands right now, the Bucs probably the best team from last year. They split a game with the Bucs, or at least played them close in both of those games. I like the Falcons to make the playoffs next season. Now in the AFC, this was pretty hard. In all honesty, this one might have been harder than the NFC, but I have to have the Cincinnati Bengals in there as one of the teams making it. Joe Burrow is simply the reason, and it's really the only reason anybody needs. I don't care what anybody says. Joe Burrow, when he's in there, it's a completely different team with the Cincinnati Bengals. Yeah, Jake Browning played all right. They have enough talent to kind of hide some of the mistakes maybe that he makes, but when Joe Burrow's in there, it almost seems to be very flawless. The biggest concerns around Joe Burrow was him getting hurt and the offensive line not really standing up to a lot of pressure that was brought onto Joe Burrow, and he's taking a lot of hits. He already throws the ball a lot, so he was getting injured. And the one season that he didn't get injured and he was healthy, he looked great in rhythm with everything. They made it to the Super Bowl. They almost won. Some people believe they could have won. But regardless of that, he makes a difference. He is one of those quarterbacks that, you always have a chance with if you're in the thick of it. And you have him. No one's going to not trust Joe Burrow with last 10 minutes, 5 minutes in the game. He changes everything. Even if their defense doesn't even have to be lights out. It has to be all right to just give him a chance. And more often than not, he'll come through with them. This could be the last year they have T. Higgins, so I think that's just more motivation for them to make the playoffs and give themselves the best chance if they're going to ultimately lose T. Higgins. So I love that for the Cincinnati Bengals. 9-8 is they still had a winning record without Joe Burrow a lot of that season. I think they're going to go over probably 11, 10 wins for sure. I have them in the playoffs as a certainty. And the last team, I had to do it to you guys. The New York Jets are going to make the playoffs. They've done too many good things not to be a playoff team. They've addressed the offensive line. Aaron Rodgers is going to come back. They brought him a new weapon. They have the number 10 pick in the draft. They could give him another weapon if they so desire. Or they could use that on another pass rusher to make that defense even more impressive. But, you could arguably say before the Texans traded for Stephon Diggs, that the Jets were having the best offseason out of any team. Now that's definitely shifted to Houston, but I think the Jets are right in there in terms of talent for sure with the Miami Dolphins to compete for that division. And we saw some hiccups from Tua. A lot of people were left unconvinced by his performances and how he played towards the end of the year when it got colder. You're not going to really get that with Aaron Rodgers. All you have to worry about is if these guys can stay healthy, Morgan Moses, Tyron Smith, Rodgers, Mike Williams, if they could all stay the majority of the season healthy, this team will not miss the playoffs for a lack of talent, that's for sure. It has to be injuries or just something else that went wrong in this season for them not to make it. They were 7-10 last year, like all these other teams, right on the brink. And all these teams either suffered an injury or were just very unlucky with the way some of these games turned out. I think that changes for most of them, and those are the 4 teams I have making it in the playoffs this year. I kept some fringe teams in there, like the Steelers. No bias there, I promise you. The Packers, I'm very high on. The Rams as well. I think they've shown a lot with that young talent. I'm sure they're going to stay in there. And I think the rest, definitely in the AFC, are hard to really take out of there. You're not going to take the Ravens, the Chiefs, Houston, definitely not. Cleveland was close, like I mentioned, just because I'm not convinced by Deshaun Watson yet. His health and his play when he is healthy hasn't convinced me. But I think their defense is too good. And those are the 4 teams in and the 4 teams out of the playoffs, in my opinion. As always, let me know what you guys think. If you think it's completely crazy, if you agree with me, I want to know it all in the live chat or in the comments whenever you watch this video. But in the meantime, I'm going to move on. We're going to go to the last break of the show, and on the other side, we're going to get to that Stephon Diggs trade, what I think of it, and just my overall reactions to this trade and what it could mean for the Houston Texans going forward. So that's coming up right after this short break. Don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss that conversation.